Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Daily News Roundup. It's Saturday, January 25th, 2025. We've got a lot to get to today.
We do a lot happening all over, some big stories developing.
Let's start with the ceasefire in Gaza. There have been some pretty tense developments since yesterday.
Yeah, Israel has actually stopped the Palestinians. They were supposed to be returning to northern Gaza, but now they're saying Hamas broke the agreement.
Okay, so is the ceasefire completely over?
Not completely, but it's a setback for sure. Part of the deal was that Hamas would release civilian hostage Arbel Yehud, along with 4 Israeli soldiers. The soldiers were released. They had been held for 477 days, but Miss Yehud was not with them.
I can't imagine what those soldiers and their families have been through 477 days. It must have been an incredible moment to be reunited.
It was an incredible moment. You could see it in the families' faces. But these women were part of an unarmed unit. They were on the Gaza border when Hamas attacked back in October 2023, so they weren't traditional soldiers. And another woman from their unit, Agam Berger, she's still being held captive.
That's just heartbreaking. What's the latest on Arbel Yehud?
Hamas is saying that she's alive and that she'll be released next week. But Israel wants proof of life. They've stopped the return of the Palestinians until they get it. And actually, ON News correspondent on the ground is reporting gunshots were fired where Palestinians were gathering to return. So it's very tense right now.
It sounds like things could fall apart at any minute. Is a lasting peace even possible in a place with so much history and so many unresolved issues?
It's the question everyone is asking. Even when you reach agreements, the journey to peace can be so fragile.
All right, let's shift gears to Africa. There's been a terrible attack in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
It is terrible news. 13 UN peacekeepers were killed in clashes with M23 rebels. 9 of them were South African. 3 were from Malawi, and 1 from Uruguay. The fighting has been really bad near Goma. The UN has even started evacuating non-essential staff.
That sounds serious. What's behind this latest violence?
The M23 rebels have been taking more and more territory. It's causing a huge humanitarian crisis. Over 400,000 people have had to flee their homes this year. And DR Congo is accusing Rwanda of helping the M23. They've even cut off diplomatic ties.
So you've got international tensions as well as internal conflict.
Exactly, and it's drawing a lot of attention. France, the EU, and the African Union, they've all condemned the violence. They're calling for the fighting to stop immediately. But it's hard to say if anyone is listening. This region has a long history of conflict. It's going to be incredibly difficult to find a way to peace.
Okay, let's turn our attention back to the U.S. President Trump's second term is off to a dramatic start. One of the biggest stories is his decision to fire at least a dozen federal watchdogs.
Yeah, that's been really controversial. A lot of people are saying it's illegal and that it's an attempt to undermine government accountability. These watchdogs, or inspectors general, they're there to keep things honest in federal agencies. They investigate wrongdoing.
So firing so many of them at once seems suspicious.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complicated. There's a law that says you have to give Congress 30 days notice before you fire an inspector general. And it seems the Trump administration didn't do that.
I'm sure Congress is not happy about this.
They're not. It's sparked concern from both Democrats and Republicans. Even Senator Chuck Grassley, who is a big Trump supporter, he said he disapproves. They're arguing that these positions are supposed to be nonpartisan and that they should be protected from political interference.
So this could end up in court.
I think it might. Some of the fired inspectors general are already lawyering up. They say they were fired illegally, they want their jobs back, and they want to make sure the government is held accountable.
We're also seeing a major development in foreign aid. An internal memo has revealed that the U.S. has basically put a hold on almost all of it.
Yeah, this comes after Trump's executive order. He wants to review how effective foreign aid is. But this memo goes even further. It says to stop everything immediately, except for emergency food aid and military funding for Israel and Egypt.
Wow, this could have a huge impact around the world.
It could. It affects so many different programs, humanitarian aid development projects all over the world.
It's interesting that they're still prioritizing certain types of aid.
It definitely fits with Trump's America First agenda. He wants to make sure that U.S. aid is actually benefiting American interests. Whether that's the best approach is another question entirely.
It's only been a week.
Yeah.
But Trump's second term is already having an impact. How are people reacting so far?
OE News correspondent has been talking to people all over the country. It's a real mixed bag. Some people are excited, some are worried, some are saying it feels like we've been here before. His supporters are happy that he's keeping his campaign promises, especially on immigration. Others are really concerned about his agenda, especially on things like climate change and healthcare.
Everyone seems to be talking about his executive orders.
Yeah, and it's not just the content of the orders. People are noticing a change in Trump himself. They're saying he seems more focused, more aggressive, like he's in a hurry to get things done. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, only time will tell.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the 200 Palestinian prisoners who were released by Israel as part of the ceasefire agreement, they've arrived back in the West Bank.
Yeah, there were big celebrations when they arrived. Many of them were serving life sentences. Some of them had even been convicted of killing Israeli civilians. It was a really emotional day for them and their families.
I can imagine. So much joy, but also so much pain. So let's bring up a lot of difficult emotions for everyone.
Absolutely. This release was part of the ceasefire agreement, but it's also reopening the debate about justice and accountability. A lot of people in Israel are feeling conflicted about this, especially the families of those who were killed by the released prisoners.
President Trump also made a visit to California this week to see the damage from the wildfires.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about this visit beforehand. Everyone knows Trump and Governor Newsom don't get along. People are worried that Trump might withhold aid,
They haven't exactly seen eye to eye in the past.
to put it mildly. But they actually had a pretty civil exchange when Trump arrived. Trump promised to help with recovery efforts. Newsom thanked him for his support.
So everything went smoothly.
Well, not completely. There were definitely some tense moments. For example, Trump said that residents should be allowed to go back to their burned properties right away, even before the hazardous waste is cleared. Mayo Bass had to push back on that. She said safety has to come first.
What about that executive order on water management?
That was another interesting development. Trump signed an order to pump water from Northern California to the south. He said it would help with the recovery. But this is an idea that's been debated for years, and a lot of people are worried about the environmental impact.
Another cabinet appointment that's making news. Pete Hegseth was sworn in as the new U.S. Defense Secretary.
Yeah, his confirmation was a close call. It came down to Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. Even some Republicans like Mitch McConnell voted against him.
Why were people so hesitant about him?
Well, Hegseth has a pretty controversial past. There are allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. And some people say he's not qualified for the job. He's more known for being a commentator on Fox News. He doesn't have a lot of traditional defense experience.
It's not your typical defense secretary.
Definitely not. But Trump likes to shake things up. He often picks people who aren't part of the establishment. Some people love it, some people hate it.
President Trump also gave a virtual address this week to the World Economic Forum in Davos. What was the reaction to that?
It was a classic Trump performance. He talked about how great the U.S. economy is and how advanced American technology is. And he threatened to put tariffs on countries that don't move their manufacturing to the U.S.
So the America First agenda is still a big priority.
Definitely. And it's making a lot of world leaders nervous. They're not sure what it means for the future of global trade.
It'll be interesting to see how things develop. We're going to take a quick break now. We'll be right back with more news after the break. And we're back with the Daily News Roundup. All right, let's head back over the global stage. We're seeing a somber anniversary. That's being overshadowed by a concerning trend.
Right, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. But at the same time, we're seeing this surge in anti-Semitism all around the world.
It's really discouraging to see that. What forms is this anti-Semitism taking?
It's a lot of different things. Hate speech, online, vandalism, even physical attacks. It's a really worrying development.
What's causing this resurgence of hate?
Well, there are probably a few things going on. Political polarization is definitely a factor. You see certain groups using Jews as scapegoats, blaming them for society's problems. Social media is also playing a role. It's so easy for hateful rhetoric to spread online.
OE News correspondent spoke with Holocaust survivors and scholars about this. They say it's more important than ever to remember the past and to fight against intolerance. They're really emphasizing education and open dialogue to combat these harmful ideologies.
Their message is so important. As time goes on, it's easy to forget the horrors of history. We have to make an effort to keep those memories alive and learn from the mistakes of the past.
Shifting gears now, Mexico is preparing for a possible wave of deportees from the U.S. under President Trump's new immigration policies.
It's a big concern down there. The Mexican government is setting up tent cities and support programs to try to handle the influx of people. But a lot of people are worried they won't be able to cope, especially in the border towns.
What are they doing to get ready?
They're working on providing the basics: food, shelter, healthcare. They're also helping deportees get Mexican identity documents, and they're offering programs to help them find jobs. and reintegrate into Mexican society.
Sounds like a lot to handle.
It is, and it's even more complicated. Because of the Remain in Mexico policy, that would require asylum seekers, who aren't Mexican, to stay in Mexico, while their cases are processed in U.S. courts.
That was a big point of contention between the two countries.
Exactly, Mexico has said that they will not accept non-Mexican asylum seekers under that policy. So it's a real diplomatic standoff.
Switching gears again, Belarus is holding a presidential election. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be a fair contest.
Not really. Alexander Lukashenko has been in power for over 30 years, and everyone expects him to win again. But there's no real competition.
So why even bother holding an election?
It's a way for authoritarian leaders to look legitimate, both to their own people and to the international community. But the truth is, the main opposition candidates are either in prison or in exile.
What's the mood like in Belarus?
There's a lot of apathy. Back in 2020, when the last election was rigged, there were huge protests. But this time, people seem resigned, like they've given up hope. Or maybe they're just too afraid to speak out.
Here's a story about the aftermath of World War II. It shows how complicated it can be to confront history. It involves a meeting between descendants of Holocaust victims and perpetrators.
It's a really moving story about reconciliation and understanding. There's a woman named Cornelia Stahler. Her grandfather was a train driver who transported Jews to Auschwitz. And she's sharing her family story and trying to deal with the guilt that she inherited.
And she's meeting with someone whose family was directly affected by those actions.
Yes, it's a very powerful encounter. It shows how important it is to remember and learn from the past, and how challenging but necessary it is to confront this shared history. It's a reminder that the Holocaust still has an impact on people today.
Let's go back to Gaza for a moment. The rescue workers there are dealing with the psychological trauma of the things they've experienced.
It's a part of the story that we don't often hear about. These people have witnessed some truly horrific things: the deaths of their colleagues, the deaths of innocent civilians, children even. The trauma they're carrying is unimaginable.
Are they getting the support they need?
That's the sad part. O News correspondent talked to several rescue workers, and none of them had been offered any counseling or psychological support. They're basically left to deal with their trauma on their own.
That's terrible.
It is. We call them heroes, and they are. But we also need to recognize the invisible wounds they carry and make sure they get the care they deserve.
Now for a story that's making waves in the tech world. The future of TikTok is still up in the air, with several potential buyers interested.
There are some interesting names on the list. You've got Mr. Beast, the YouTube star, Elon Musk, Oracle. It's a pretty diverse group.
What does President Trump think about all this?
He said that he likes the idea of a joint ownership model, where the U.S. would own 50% of TikTok. He's also hinted that he prefers certain buyers over others, so it's a very unpredictable situation.
I have a feeling we'll be talking about this again.
Probably. This is about more than just who owns the app. It's about data privacy, national security, and the relationship between the U.S. and China.
Okay, let's wrap things up with a disturbing report. ONA News correspondent has uncovered evidence that China is using psychiatric hospitals to detain and silence political dissidents.
This is a really chilling story. It reminds us of a dark time in history when governments use psychiatry to control people. It's a reminder that human rights abuses can happen anywhere and that we have to be vigilant.
It's hard to believe that's still happening today.
It is a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted.
So how is China doing this?
Basically, if you speak out against the government or protest, they can label you as mentally ill, and then they can force you into a psychiatric institution where they can give you drugs, antipsychotic drugs, or even electroconvulsive therapy.
Wow. Did ONA News correspondent find out how common this is?
They found 59 people who were hospitalized for mental health reasons after they protested or spoke out against the government, and they found evidence that this practice is becoming more common.
So it's a way to silence dissent. Didn't China pass a law in 2013 to try to stop this kind of thing from happening?
They did. The law says you can't treat someone who isn't actually mentally ill, and it says that people have to agree to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital, unless they're a danger to themselves or others.
So what's going on? Why isn't the law being followed?
It seems like the police are finding ways to get around it. Our news correspondent spoke to a Chinese lawyer who said that the police are using psychiatric hospitals as a way to silence people without having to go through the courts.
It's pretty scary that they can do that.
It shows how easily a legal system can be abused to take away people's rights.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
It's been a busy news day for sure. Ceasefires, political maneuvering, stories from history, human rights abuses.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new today and that you maybe see the world a little differently now.
And remember, even when the news is overwhelming, you're not alone in trying to make sense of it all.
We'll be back tomorrow with more news and analysis. Until then, thanks for listening.